Hello, I'm Audrey Scanlan, the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Central Pennsylvania, and I bring you greetings on this beautiful, beautiful spring day, now in the 5th week of Eastertide. Spring is certainly sprung here at my house. I'm sure it has where you live as well. And spring is a time in which we experience new life and rebirth. The trees are all in full leaf. It seems suddenly overnight. The grass is greening and the garden is beginning to show forth some of the beauty of the season. And in this time of year, I always get this sense that it's time to begin something new, time to move on. I get itching a little bit to do things differently, to break out of that winter period of hibernation, if you will. And today I have a request to make of you. In this time of the pandemic, my request that I'd like to make of you is to hold fast, to hold steady. And this is, as I've suggested, sort of counterintuitive to the time of year in which we are looking to move on and experience new life and change and growth. We know that in the life cycle of a disaster, we've been taught this from our friends at Episcopal Relief and Development, that at the life cycle of a disaster, what happens right after that disaster is there's a certain amount of, it's called heroic effort, in which efforts are made and heroes come out of the woodwork to begin to offer immediate response after a disaster. And then what happens is there is a period, sometimes a rather sharp decline into a period of disillusionment. And then, of course, as the disaster begins to heal, as efforts at curbing our pandemic the disease is mitigated, what happens is that we begin to come out of that and come into a period of rebirth and renewal, and we end up at the end of that into sort of what we're calling the new normal. And so it looks a lot like a bell curve with a little bump at the beginning. We go up and then we come down, and then we go through a period of rebirth and rebuilding as we level off into this new existence, the new normal. Well, what we have learned recently is that the period down in the bottom, in this particular situation that we are enduring, the pandemic of COVID-19, is going to be extended beyond what an average or typical disaster would bring. And so what we're finding is that rather than those of us waiting out a longer duration of this period before we can begin to rebuild, what we're finding is that people are beginning to spin off on their own and attempt to create that other end of the bell curve. We've seen this recently, just in the last week, with different movements across the country of factions or municipalities or counties who are choosing to go rogue, as I call it, away from the orders of their governor and create their own set of rules for how to reopen or begin to live back into what they believe is normal. And so my request of us today is to hold fast in the face of that. In our diocese, over the last weekend, there were 8 different counties who opted to kind of create their own time frame, create their own pattern of re-entering, of creating their own new normal, if you will. And my request to you is to hold fast, that your task force on operations has worked with me to create a plan for our re-entry, our returning to our buildings. We are following our governor's timeline, and when the time is right, when the governor has announced that each of our various counties is moved by him and his staff into the yellow phase, then we will be ready to go as well. Now, we have some precedents for this in the church. The first one that I've been praying about and thinking about in the past week or so is the precedent set by Saint Benedict of Nursia back in the early 6th century, the late 5th century. Benedict of Nursia was the founder of a monastery in Monte Cassino in Italy, and the father of Western monasticism. And he asked 3 vows of his monks: a vow of stability, or holding fast, a vow of obedience, and a vow of fidelity to the monastic order. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're all going to become monks, but I do think there's something about that virtue of stability that we can learn from. So back in Benedict's days, if you wanted to become a monk and you were an aspirant or an inquirer, you would come and you'd knock on the door of the monastery, and they'd let you keep knocking for 4 or 5 or 6 days. And if you were still there and you were that persistent to keep knocking on the door, then you would be welcomed in. And you would be invited to be embraced by the rhythm of life in the monastery for 2 months. And at the end of 2 months, you would go before the abbot, the leader of the monastery, and he would read you the rules, the guidebook to how they lived life in community, and say, this is hard work. Are you willing to do this? And if after 2 months you said yes, then you were allowed to live as a novice in the rhythm of the monastic community for another 6 months. And after 6 months, you were brought back again. So a total of 8 months now in life within the community. You're brought back again in front of the abbot and asked if this is what you desired. And if you said yes, and that you could do it, you were given that final test, the final test of 4 more months before you took your vows and became a full member of the monastic community. So I say this because I think that's what we're being asked to do now. We're being tested in a way, to test our obedience, to test our perseverance, to test the steadfastness of our faith, to test our cohesion in this community of ours as Christians, in which we have committed ourselves to follow a different way. And that's what I'm inviting you to today, to stay with us, to hold fast, to hold on, to embrace that virtue of stability, which I believe will serve us very well in the end, that will keep us safe, and that will help us to come out of this pandemic stronger and more faithful. Now, we have another precedent for this, of course, not just the monastic movement, thanks to Saint Benedict, but our God is faithful. Our God is steadfast and true. And we know that and experience that all through the stories of Scripture, but in the hymnal of the Hebrew people, and the hymnal that we have adopted of the Psalms, we read about God's steadfast love for us all the time. And in closing, I'd like to share with you Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be moved, and though the mountains be toppled into the depths of the sea. Though its waters rage and foam, and though the mountains tremble at its tumult, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be overthrown. God shall help her at the break of day. The nations make much ado, and the kingdoms are shaken. God has spoken, and the earth shall melt away. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come now and look upon the works of the Lord. What awesome things he has done on earth. It is he who makes the war to cease in all the world. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear and burns the shields with fire. Be still then, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. And so, friends, hold fast to God, hold fast to each other, hold fast to our plan, and we will know the love of God, the truth of God, and we will be safe and we will be well. And so God bless you and God keep you this day and always.